All right, Jesse on fire. Welcome back to the channel. So I've got a video here. I'm going to talk about Conor and Khabib again, but very, very different context. I want to talk about Conor, and then I want to talk about what Khabib's coach said about Conor relating to them rematching. But I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Accent podcast. Awesome. A podcast I did, but he's done some big guys, man. Go check him out. The Accent. He's had some huge MMA interviews. But he texted me last night and he made me revisit a topic that I had not thought about in a long time, which is actually a really interesting topic. So I'll actually read it to you because he touched on all the points and I hadn't really thought about this. He said, it'd be an interesting video to hear you do about Conor. Do you remember when Conor was pushing for ownership in the UFC and some people were saying he deserved it? You think that Dana and the Fertittas made a smart decision not giving it to him? How big of a nightmare would Conor's ownership be from a PR perspective after all Conor's troubles? Do you think Conor would fight more often if he had ownership? And would Conor behave differently outside of the UFC if he had ownership? So here's the thing. Okay, so number one, had he been given ownership then, it wouldn't have mattered because the company was going to get acquired. So like they would have given him ownership and the company would have gotten acquired. He would have just got bought out, right? So when he was pushing for ownership, unless I am getting my timeline wrong, he was asking for it when the Fertittas still owned it. And candidly, I completely understand why they didn't give it to him, because they were like, we're selling the company. They're like, we don't need, like, if he's unhappy, if Conor's unhappy and he's disgruntled, like, we don't really care that much because we're selling the company for $4.5 billion right now, right? And, I think from a business, let's just remove that though. Let's just, because we'll just remove that as it relates to the rest of the question. So let's say like in the New Deal, right? Conor's first fight post acquisition, which would have been, I guess, the Khabib fight probably. Let's say, or maybe Alvarez, I don't know. Either way, let's say that they gave him ownership, right? Like, so Conor, instead of being paid the normal $30 million, he got, $10 million and $20 million in company stock, right? Because that's obviously they're not going to give him more ownership in the company than cash that they would have paid him, right? The value of the stock is more valuable than the cash, right? The value of the cash, it's worth $20 million, right? The value of company stock is whatever it's going to be worth in 20 years. Conor's not going to need that money, so he'll just sit on it. And as the company's value grows, that money grows, right? Now, obviously, you can take the cash and invest it other places, but anybody who believes in their company is going to be less intent on giving people ownership than they are on giving them cash, minus a person who is trying to incentivize a new executive or a new hire. Like, obviously, you get stock options in all these companies, but you get minimal stock options. Like, if you got like you come onto a tech company that's pretty well established, you get say your salary is $100K, and then you have, commissions that take you up to $200K or something. I don't know, like whatever, they'll give you $50,000 in stock options, which is cool. You just kind of earn it for being there over a few years. And then as the company grows, so, if you come on and the company's worth $1 billion and then, 4 years from then the company's worth $3 billion, well, your 50K is worth 150K, right? So like, it's a way of incentivizing employees to like work hard to try to continue to grow the value of the company. That's the reason why you give somebody stock options. Now, obviously, UFC fighters are 1099 independent contractors, like Dana said. None of them get stock options. Why would you give them to them, right? Like, a fighter's not going to fight harder because he has stock options in the UFC. Now, you might give employees at the UFC stock options, but you're not going to give a fighter stock options because they're going to fight the same either way. Like, ultimately, your goal as an executive in the company or as an owner in the company is to create shareholder value. It's to create more value inside of the company, right? And so the only time you're going to give stock options to anyone, or you're going to pay anyone more money, or you're going to do anything, is if the ultimate goal is to create more shareholder value, okay? So like, that's the thing that people don't understand, is like, they think about these things and they think about it through a really simplistic view, when all you need to do is you just need to say, okay, what are these people's goals? Like, what is everyone's goal that's involved here, right? The fighter wants to win their fight so that they can get a number one contender fight and then hopefully win that and then get a title shot. And they want to win the title because then they'll have the belt, they'll be recognized as the best fighter in the world, and they're going to get back end pay-per-view points, they're going to make more money. You know exactly what their motivations are, right? An executive, okay, a CEO at any company, their goal is to create shareholder value. Period, point blank, period. Okay. So the way you do that is you increase revenue, you decrease costs if you can, but that doesn't really matter as much. It's more about increasing revenue. Okay. Not at the expense of losing money, but your margins are less important than your growth. Okay. Sorry. If you don't understand what that means, just don't worry about it. It's not that important. The bottom line is you're trying to create a more valuable company. The more money you bring in every year, the more valuable your company. It's as simple as that. And so how is Dana going to generate more revenue for the UFC by giving stock options to fighters? It's not. It's not, right? And I would also argue that, candidly, in a lot of cases, giving stock options to employees probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference, you know? But, you know, for executives, it does, because that's how you attract good talent. Now, you probably, you know, I mean, you could say that about giving stock options to tech company people, whatever. I mean, I have stock options in my company, obviously. But yeah, so as it relates to the rest of the question for Conor, do I think it was a smart decision to not give it to him? Yeah. Yeah, I do. I don't think, you know, I mean, unless they were like, yeah, we'll give you ownership, but you have to fight twice a year for the next 5 years, you know, that would be the only, I mean, that's the only way that it would have made sense is if you said barring injuries that are verified by UFC doctors to keep you out of fights, we'll give you this ownership, but you have to sign on to fight at least twice a year, you know, for the next 5 years, something like that, you know. But even then, that's, I mean, it seems logical. No, like now knowing what Conor's done with his career, which has generated even more attention even than when he was asking for it. But back then, you just have no idea what's going to happen with a fighter's career, man. You know, like George Masvidal, like no one would have guessed that. Okay, like if you would have invested in George Masvidal stock in 2017, you'd be balling, dude. Okay, but that's, you know, I'm just saying it's like an example, like, because each of these fighters is just an asset, right? So at the same time, the same thing can happen in reverse. You know what I mean? Same thing can happen in reverse. A guy who just has run through everybody, he takes a vicious knockout. He's, you know, all of a sudden it's like he's a different person. He loses another fight in a row, and people start being like, dude, this guy's not even that good. He starts questioning himself, and then he starts falling apart. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're locked into paying him a fortune when he's not really that valuable. So, I mean, that's why UFC, they sign him to these long-term contracts, but in reality, that's just to lock them in, and then they make them negotiate every single time. The big fighters, that's why they lock them into these long-term contracts, but then everyone really knows, okay, that they're actually going to have to negotiate what they're going to pay them for each individual fight. Okay, it's a strategy from the UFC. Lock them in so they can't fight anywhere else. But then, you know, we're going to have to haggle with them each time, and we're going to set the contracted amount at an amount that's not going to kill the company if this fighter falls apart. You know, because like you lock him in for 8 fights. Like let's say, you know, you got George Masvidal. Like let's say you locked him in where you have to pay him $3 million minimum every time he fights, and you have him for 8 fights, and you have to give him 3 fights a year, and then he loses 3 fights in a row, and now you're paying him $3 million to fight like the 12th ranked guy on the undercard. It doesn't make, you know, so that's why we're going to pay you a fortune for this fight, but you're locked in for 8 more fights, and the terms on these are not great. Everybody knows we're going to renegotiate, etc. So like with Conor, maybe there was some upside if you gave him ownership, if you were going to get him to agree to do a bunch of fights that he wouldn't have done otherwise, but I don't think that that's very likely that would have happened anyway. How big of a nightmare would Conor's ownership be from a PR perspective after Conor's troubles? I don't know. I mean, listen, like no matter how you slice it, had Conor been given ownership, and then like would he have behaved differently? No, he wouldn't have behaved differently. Conor wouldn't have behaved differently. No, definitely not. He has way more reason to keep his reputation in line tied to Proper 12. He has hundreds of millions of dollars in ownership there, and when he has a bad, you know, an event happen that's bad, like what sounds like was just an absolute BS charge on this France thing. It's catastrophic for his brand. I mean, that's why you can tie, you know, a bad event to his immediate fight both times, right? Like he wasn't, after Khabib, he didn't fight at all. He had no motivation to fight. Then all of a sudden he gets this, you know, these assault charges put on him and he punches the old man. And then all of a sudden he's like, I'm coming back, I'm fighting. fights Cowboy, proper 12, shoots back up, and he's like, yeah, no, I'm retired. I don't care. Nah, I don't need to fight. No, I'm retired. And it's like sexual assault charge. And he's like, I need to fight. I need to fight now. I called that, right? Because it's all about his reputation. So he has way more reason to be concerned about his reputation relating to proper 12 than he would if he had $30-40 million in stock in UFC, right? Like that, because he's not going to impact the UFC's sales just because he had some minority position in, in stock options or in ownership or whatever. You know what I mean? Like this, he just wouldn't. He's not going to affect the value of the company, so his motivation to behave differently would be non-existent. And no, I don't think they would have. I don't think it would be a disaster from a PR perspective for the UFC either, because the company's worth what, like $8-9 billion now, and if Conor, best case scenario, would have had like maybe $40 million in ownership. I mean, he's a heavy minority ownership position, right? Like that's like, so if it's worth $8 billion, then 10% is $800 million. Okay. So then, which means 1% is 80 million, which means 40 million is a 0.5% ownership. Okay. So like best case scenario, Conor would own 1/2 of 1% if he was given what he asked for. So it wouldn't matter. Like it wouldn't matter from a PR perspective. But yeah, so there's that. Now, let me tell you about what Khabib's coach said about Conor, or about Khabib's next fight, right? So again, I hear a lot of people assuming he's going to beat Justin Gaethje. I'm going to be honest with you. I bet on Justin Gaethje this morning, not because I think he's going to win, but because I looked like, so I heard, a couple things happened actually. So I heard Javier Mendez say that he thinks that Khabib's next fight between Conor or GSP or the most likely, he says he thinks Conor is a way bigger fight. He thinks it's more likely that he would fight Conor than he would fight GSP. But again, in the way that he said it, I kept thinking, like, I don't understand why these guys aren't dismissing these questions. Like, why is Khabib's head coach not dismissing that question? That's not a question you answer. You go, dude, he's fighting Justin Gaethje in a week. We're not worried about GSP. We're not worried about Conor. We're not worried about that. He has the biggest challenge he's ever had right in front of him. And I'm saying, like, this is the thing I'm best at in the world, is gauging this kind of thing. And I am hearing so much, just kind of, it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to beat Khabib. And I'm not saying Khabib necessarily is there. Like I said, he might have just been trying to get Islam a fight. But that's his head coach. Okay? And the other thing, too, I watched the UFC countdown, and I got to see, and I had never actually seen Abdulmanap's coaching. Like, I never got to see him coach. And he was like, he's the coach, man. He was Khabib's coach for real. You know, like, he's not like, hey, here's my son, I'm going to take it easy on him. Like, he was like, get going, and they start running. Khabib's kind of jogging. He goes, get moving. And then so Khabib, starts running. And that was like that was a recent fight. Like, I think it was probably the training camp for his last fight. And I was looking at that, I'm like, oh man, this is actually, because I've been watching the behind the scenes with Khabib. I'm like, oh, this is a different universe without his dad there. Like this, because I see Khabib running all the workouts. And then I watched Javier Mendez interact with Khabib's dad. And Javier Mendez it was like Abdulmanap, Javier Mendez. Like, you could just see the dynamic between the two of them. Abdulmanap was the man. Like, he was the man between those two. So I'm like, damn, now Javier Mendez is the head coach. He can't be Abdulmanap for Khabib. Now, that doesn't mean Khabib can't win, but it's very different. It is a very different dynamic. Very different. And again, if I had to bet, if both sides were, 1-to-1 betting, I wouldn't have taken the bet, but it's 3-to-1. It's 3-to-1 Gaethje right now. Like, if you bet on Gaethje, you get, I got plus 265. Okay. So for every $100 I bet, I win 265 if Gaethje wins. That's ridiculous. You think it's a 3-to-1 likelihood that Khabib wins? That's absurd. That's absurd. If Khabib has an edge, it's a small one. He might have an edge like this. They're saying this is how likely it is that, like, here's even Steven. This is how likely it is that Khabib beats Gaethje. Bullshit. Like, those are the odds, And so, like, if you see odds that are misaligned with the odds that you think it is that he wins, you take that bet and you bet heavy. I bet pretty fucking heavy, I'm gonna be honest. Just because I think that those are the odds are so misaligned. You know, like Khabib should be like a plus. Or I'm sorry, Gaethje should be like a plus 125. You know, honestly, like I think the odds are double as he should be an underdog, but like at half of what he is. Honestly, I really believe that he should be a half of what he is. So it doesn't make any sense to me. So again, if Khabib wins, I won't be surprised at all. Like if just in straight out, like if I was like, who do you think's going to win 50-50? I'd probably say Khabib. But at plus 260, that's a no-brainer bet. And by the way, so I did that, and then I did another bet where I parlayed Justin Gaethje and Derek Lewis, because Derek Lewis is fighting Curtis Blades. You know what I get if those two guys win? 10.5 to 1. So, I mean, you think that the Black Beast can't beat Curtis Blades? So, I bet $200 and I'll win over $2,000 if those guys both win on that particular bet. But yeah, it's neither here nor there. I mean, bottom line is there's a big change for Khabib, which is a factor that does not play in his favor. And Justin Gaethje is a monster, like just an absolute monster whose skills match up very again, if Khabib beats Gaethje, he'll never lose. No one else is going to beat him. No one else is going to beat him. Gaethje's the only one who has a chance to beat him. So, I will be very curious. The other thing that Khabib's Khabib's coach talked about, Mendez talked about, was he said that he thinks Conor is a heavy favorite to beat Dustin Poirier, which I completely agree with. He was like, I think that's a tough day at the office for Dustin. I completely agree. Styles make fights, man. Styles make fights. Dustin didn't grow up wrestling. Like he didn't grow up his entire life wrestling like Justin Gaethje did. Right? That's why, the fact that Khabib was able to take Dustin Poirier down, choke him out, doesn't really apply in this fight. Right? And did Conor grow up wrestling? No. Right? Which is why Khabib being able to take him down and choke him out doesn't really apply in this fight either. Okay? You go down the line of Khabib's opponents, you're not going to find someone with a wrestling pedigree as good as Justin Gaethje's, with stand-up as good as Justin Gaethje's. He is for sure the toughest matchup he's ever had by a mile. And Justin Gaethje, he was on this interview that I watched, and he's like, and he was talking about Ali Abdelaziz, he's talking about Khabib, and everybody's like, yeah, I respect these guys. He's like, but fuck these guys. He's like, I'm gonna fuck their plans up. They're out making plans for the next fight. I'm gonna fuck their plans up. And I'm like, that is a very, see. So do you hear the difference? And I don't know if I'm even going to be able to do this justice, what I'm trying to communicate, okay? So Khabib says, I'll consider Michael Chandler the number one contender, okay? So he's assuming that he's going to win, right? And then Javier Mendez, they're talking about his next fight, right? And then Khabib, they ask him, who do you want to fight next? He starts talking about, well, I don't know, maybe GSP, maybe this guy, whatever. And I hear that, I'm like, God, man, that just doesn't sound good. Like, it doesn't sound good. Yeah, and he's just, he's assuming he's going to win, but it's different because he's talking about other stuff. He's talking about who he's going to fight next, okay? That's the difference. That answer is, I'm looking past Justin Gaethje, right? So he's assuming he's going to win, but he's looking past Justin Gaethje, where Justin Gaethje is assuming he's going to win, and he's focused 100% on Khabib, and his manager and Dana and guys who are planning his next fight. He's like, I'm going to fuck their plans up. See, you hear the difference? Gaethje locked in 100% on Khabib. Khabib looking past Gaethje, and Khabib's coach looking past Gaethje. Okay, that's the definition of looking past a guy. Okay, the definition of looking past a guy, talking about the next fight after him, where both of them are saying they're going to win. One of them is talking about their next fight. The other one is talking exclusively about that opponent. Okay, that's the better mindset, right? Now, Khabib obviously knows how good Justin Gaethje is. I'm not trying to say that he is not taking him seriously. But again, the more footage I see, the more interviews I watch, the better I like Gaethje's chances. And I know Khabib fans hate when I say this. Like, I am a Khabib fan, okay? If you actually ask, like, if I had no money on this fight, if you were like, who are you rooting for? I'm rooting for Khabib, for sure. For sure. I love that guy. I'm being an objective analyst who can read people and understands this stuff very well. Like, very well when it comes to the mental stuff. I understand this on a level that most people don't. So I make videos about it so that I can share that with people. I'm not trying to be braggy and be a prick. I'm trying to share things that I know that other people don't, which is, that's not one, anything that says After this, I'm looking past this guy, not good. Okay? Anything, I'm going to crush this guy, good. Good. Talk about how you're going to do it, good. Next fight, not good. This guy, very good. So, anyway, that's what I got. Subscribe to the channel, ring the bell.